while they're getting set up, a little background on this, why we're having this presentation tonight. As we have mentioned in previous council meetings, and I've spoken with the school board and administration about this, HB 413 is a bill that's going through the process at the State House level. It did come out of committee. 10-9 was voted in favor of the bill, and last week it was voted upon by the full House and passed overwhelmingly, I think 267 to 83. The reason why this bill is so important is it reinstates a partial contribution by the state to the employer's cost of retirement benefits. And the financial benefit to both the city and school district, if this were to pass, is substantial. So in talking to Mrs. Reed about the importance of this bill, I thought, wouldn't it be a good idea if we had a presentation about New Hampshire retirement system as a whole, so we all are fully educated on what that system is and how it's funded. And so Mrs. Reed and Mrs. Silva from NHMA have come up from Concord to be with us this evening to discuss this. So we'll have the presentation, and I'm sure there'll be opportunity for question and answers. Thank you.
And, you know, Barbara has very kindly, do I need to stand someplace?
Yes, for the viewing audience at home.
Okay, thank you. Barbara has very kindly put my name on this, but really, she is our retirement expert. And we work together on some of the stuff, and we work ideas back and forth, but she's the one who looks at the state comprehensive annual financial report and the retirement system year-end report and pulls all the numbers. So I just want to make sure to give her the credit that's due. I drove her here.
Thank you.
But I also wanted to say that we appreciate the opportunity to come here and speak with you. And we can do that because you are members of the Municipal Association, and we appreciate that as well. And we hope that you are all receiving our legislative bulletin. I know that we've been doing some work with you all and with our bulletin person to make sure that we've got the right email for everybody and it's going through and everything. And also, please take a look at our website and our full member services plan so that you know all of the various things that we do besides lobby and try to keep track of what's going on with the retirement system. So with that, I will turn it over to Barbara, and I might jump in now and again because I get exercised about something, but she's got the information.
Dr. McGoodwin, would you mind flipping some of the switches behind you so it's not so bright?
All right, well, good evening, and as Judy said, thank you for asking us to be here. What I've given you, now that the lights are out and you can't see what's in front of you, is a copy of our PowerPoint presentation. And what I'm going to do is sort of just go through sort of a high-level review of the retirement system, particularly from the perspective of the employers, because we do know that there's significant costs to employers for this system, and there's some nuances, and I know we get asked a lot of questions that I'll be answering hopefully before you even have a chance to ask some of them. So with that, we're going to start. You have the PowerPoint presentation. You also have for your reading enjoyment is the summary report. The annual financial report from the New Hampshire retirement system is about 150 pages, but they do a summary report that is much shorter and has some graphs and other information in there. I may be referring to some of that in a minute. And then also the other handout I'm giving you is an article that we wrote in 2010 that talks about the perfect storm and sort of what got us into the situation we are in with the New Hampshire retirement system in terms of its unfunded liability. And again, I'll be referring to that. So we'll just start with the just the overview of the New Hampshire retirement system. It is a defined benefit plan, and what that means is that the benefits are defined based on the years of service that the participants have in the system, and they are guaranteed that defined benefit, as opposed to like a 401k plan where there's contributions and sort of your pot of money at the end is what a retiree would have. So this is a defined benefit plan. It is governed by state statute. So that is why we pay so close attention to what the law says, and why you as a city council can't make changes to it, because it is through state law. It is administered by a board of trustees. So there's a board of trustees with the retirement system that are the plan administrators. They also have what's called an independent investment committee. That is a relatively new entity for the system to handle the investments. They have about $7 billion worth of assets that they are actively investing. And I think another important piece to recognize too is there is a constitutional provision about the New Hampshire retirement system that requires that the funding for this system be actuarially sound and follow good actuarial practices in terms of how this system is funded, and that the benefits in the system are for the benefits of the members. It specifically says the legislature, the governor, no one can get at that money. It is there for the benefit of the members. But I think that's important to recognize, though. So there is a constitutional protection for this trust fund for the retirement system. Just a little bit of, sort of a demographic type of slide here. So this is showing you, the red is showing you the active members, and the blue is showing the retired members over about the last 10 years. So as you can see, the number of active members, it reached a high of about 51,000 active members in 2009. We've dropped down a little bit, obviously because of the recession. A lot of municipalities were dealing with the recession by leaving positions open or eliminating positions. So you can see in 2016 there were about 48,000 active members in the system. What's changed more dramatically is the number of retirees, and you can see that back in 2006 there were almost 20,000 retirees, but now in 2016 there's about over 32,000 retirees. And obviously this isn't surprising as we talk about the baby boomers reaching the retirement age, so it's not surprising that there are more and more retirees. I think the thing that's important to recognize here is, though, that 10 years ago the number of active members to retirees was about 2.5 active members in the system for every one retiree. Now we're down to a situation where it's more like 1.5 active members in the system for every retiree that we have. The system is 50 years old this year. It was established in 1967, and it combined 4 separate systems. There had been a separate system for teachers, for police, for fire, for state employees. They were all combined into this one system in 1967. And with that combination came the requirement that all full-time teachers, full-time police officers, and full-time firefighters are required to be participants in this system. There is no choice. You do not have a choice for any of the full-time teachers, police, or firefighters that you have. They are required to be in the system. And at the time, even before the system was established in 1967, the state made a contribution towards the cost of teachers, police, and firefighters. When the system was established, this single system was established in 1967, the state continued that 35% contribution, and we'll talk a little bit more about what has happened with that and where House Bill 413 is right now. The other question that, for other employees, anyone other than teachers, police, and fire, it was the local government's option whether they wanted to join or not. Most municipalities, most cities, most counties, most school districts have joined the system. There are a few that haven't, but most have. Obviously, Claremont, I believe, has for your employees, so anyone other than the public safety and the teachers are still part of the system. In terms of getting out of the system, and this is a question that I always get, is can our city or our town, can we get out of the retirement system? And the answer is no, you can't for teachers, police, or firefighters, because statutorily they're required to be members. You can elect to get out for your employees. However, the provision in the law is fairly onerous, and we've never seen any municipality that's been able to follow those procedures and get out of the system. It requires that you have to provide benefits that are equal to or better than what the retirement system is currently offering. You have to pay off your share of the unfunded liability, and I believe you have to have a majority vote of the participants to leave the New Hampshire retirement system to join whatever other system you're creating. So we really haven't seen any municipality able to do that, and very few have even tried to do that. But that is a question I always get, especially when we get to the end of this and we start talking about the cost. The question is always, can we get out of it? So I might as well just answer it right in the beginning here. With these participants, there's what are called two groups, Group 1 and Group 2. Group 1 is your employees and teachers, and Group 2 is your police and fire. And the reason they're split between the two groups is there's different eligibility requirements when they can retire, the age that they can retire, and the benefit calculations for those. And also with the Group 2, the police and fire in New Hampshire do not pay into Social Security. Teachers do, and as do your employees, but there is no Social Security payments either by the employee or the employer for those police or fire. This is a graph that is showing you the contributions, as they're called, from the employers for the retirement system. Where do they get their money? The money comes from three places. It comes from the employees' contributions. So employees pay a percentage of what their compensation is, their wages, goes into the system. The employers pay a percentage on that compensation. And then the rest of the money to fund the system comes from the investment earnings. And about 2/3 of the money for the system comes from the investment earnings. So most of it is from investment earnings. This chart here shows you the trend that we've seen with the employer contributions. Right now there are 471 employers in the system, including the state of New Hampshire. The state of New Hampshire is an employer. They are the largest employer in the system. They comprise about 25% of the members and about 25% of what's being paid in. But again, you can see here that over the last 10 years or so, the contributions, the payments required of employers has grown from about $175 million a year to where are we up to about just under $425 million per year. In terms of the requirements to pay in, the amount that the employees pay in is set by statute. So that is in law. And it was recently increased a few years ago, but it had pretty much been the same amount. I think Group 1 was about 5% of their pay they paid in, so the teachers and employees paid in 5%. It was about 9.3% for police and fire, but again, those have increased in recent years. But that was set by statute. The investment earnings are what they are. It's whatever the system earns over the course of the year. And then whatever else is needed comes from the employers. And so it's really the employer's contribution rate. That's the one that floats, so to speak. That's not set by statute, but it's the one that floats. And every 2 years, the retirement system does a review of what the actuaries predict their liabilities are. What do they need to fund the pensions? And remember, they're looking out at a 30, 40-year horizon, because you've obviously got some young people that are starting their careers, so they're looking at a 30 to 40-year horizon with this system. They're making a bunch of assumptions as to what those liabilities will be. They look at the assets that the system has, and the difference, they look at what will the employees pay in based on their projected pay, and the difference is made up by the employers. And that's why you see the rates change every 2 years. They go through a valuation process. They actually go through the valuation process every year, but it's only every other year that they reset the rates. With those assumptions that the actuaries are looking at, they're looking at a lot of things. They're looking at, predicting what's the person's salary going to be in 20 years when they retire. How old is a person going to be when they retire? Are they going to retire at 60 or keep working till 65? Are they going to be married? Are they going to have spousal benefits? That's an option to have some spousal benefits. So there's a lot of demographic assumptions that they have to make, which is, I guess, the definition of what an actuary does, is that. But one of the most important assumptions they make is what are the interest returns, or the investment returns going to be. So as part of this calculation, they're looking at the $7 billion in assets that they have right now. They have to also look at how do we think that those assets are going to grow over the long term. And that's called the assumed rate of return. So they're predicting the assumed rate of return also. What happens is when any of their predictions don't pan out favorably, it creates a hole. So if all of a sudden they predict that everyone's going to retire at X age, but a whole bunch of people retire sooner, or unfortunately, people die sooner than, or die later than they predicted. They predicted people would die and we'd have to stop paying them pension, but they die later, or they don't hit those investment returns, then that creates a situation where their assumptions weren't met, so they have to adjust the rates, and it's the employer's rates that get adjusted. The next chart I wanted to show you, this is from the retirement system. This shows you the 10-year trend of their investment returns. And I think if you, on the handout I gave you, which is their, the NHRS handout, the summary, their annual report summary on page 6, it's the same chart, but it goes back for 20 years. So this shows you a 20-year history of their returns. And not surprising, they had good years and they had not such good years. And things were going well for a while, and things were not going well for several years. The important thing to recognize is, again, they rely on investment advisors to assist them in determining. The board actually makes the decision as what is that assumed rate of return? What do we assume our investment earnings are going to do? For a number of years, it was set pretty high. It was up as high as 9.5%. And again, they're looking at investment returns over a long-term horizon, not a short-term. But it was pretty high at 9.5%, which was pretty typical of other public pension systems. That assumed rate has been dropping over the last 10 years. They dropped it down to 8.5%, then they dropped it to 7.75%, and recently they dropped it down to 7.25%. But again, what happens in the rate setting process, if they're now assuming that the money coming into the system from their investment earnings is going to be less, then the difference has to be made up somewhere, and that difference is made up in the employer rates. So the employer rates are directly affected by that assumed rate of return. The other thing to keep in mind when you're looking at these charts, obviously you can see the deficit that they had in 2009, but let's just look at 2008. So they had about a 5% loss in 2008. Well, you might think, well, 5%, that's not too drastic. But if that was the same year that they were predicting and based all their assumptions on the fact that they were going to earn 8%, that 5% deficit is really a 13% deficit. So you can see clearly the deficits, the recession hit hard. Unfortunately, what they do is when there are investment losses as well as investment gains, they spread those out over a 5-year period just so that the employer rates aren't spiking up and down all the time, so that they're trying to smooth things out a little bit. Unfortunately, we don't very often see the employer rates going down. They've been going up, but there is that smoothing process that really did help when they had to absorb the 2008-2009 losses. And again, it was fortunate 2010, 2011 had some significant gains to help absorb that too. But even those gains were spread out over a number of years to help sort of balance it out. So that's sort of the discussion of where does the money come from. This is just the next two charts, graphs just kind of show you a little bit more about where the money's going. This one just shows the age of the retirees, how many years they've had of service in the different categories. Somewhat interesting to see that the blue one is the employees, and you can see a lot of them retire 10 to 14 years. For this system, employees, teachers, police, firefighters, they all vest after 10 years, although I believe, yeah, they vest after 10 years. I think, because I've been asked, well, why do so many employees leave after 10 years? I think for a lot of times it may be employees that coming to work for a local government, or maybe a situation where this is sort of their second career. And so once they hit that 10-year mark, stay a few more years, now they're vested in the system and they leave then. You can see that the red one or the maroon one is the teachers. Teachers reach full retirement benefits after they had 30 years, so it's not surprising that that one's spiking at 30 years. And then the other ones, sort of police and fire, you can see the green bar in the 20 to 24 years, they vest at 20 years, so it's not surprising that that's when a lot of police officers and firefighters, that's the higher one for them in that category. In terms of the dollar amounts, this shows you what the average pensions are. And again, the pension is based on the years of service. So somebody who comes and works for you that starts working at age 56, they can still retire at age 60 and have 4 years of service, but they have a really small pension, obviously. The formula is going to be they're just not going to have a lot of money into the system. But that's why you do see that there are people that are retiring in 4 years or less than 10 years. And this again is showing you the average pensions. As I mentioned, police and fire don't pay into Social Security. They pay a higher rate in Group 2. So the police and fire are in fact paying a higher rate. And again, that's part of that is because they don't pay into Social Security, so they don't get Social Security benefits. Whereas with the employees and teachers, they are paying into Social Security. You as the employer is paying Social Security on them. So you can see they do have lower averages for that. The next slide is actually, let me skip this one for now and just talk about, oh, no, let's go back to this one. So this one, slide didn't print for some reason, so it's the very last slide in your packet if you wanted to look at this one. And I'd say this is probably one of the more important slides here. This shows you what is called the unfunded liability with the New Hampshire retirement system. And this is basically showing you what the difference is between the liabilities that they have, what the actuaries have indicated they need to pay all the pension obligations that they have versus the assets they have on hand to pay that. And as you can see, in 2007, it was about 2.7. Unfortunately, these are billions of dollars. So it was $2.7 billion was the unfunded liability in 2007. It is now about $5 billion. It's about $5.7 billion right now. The article that I gave you, we called it The Perfect Storm. It was written, that article was written in 2010, and it was explaining what got us to that hole back in 2007 and 2008. And basically what happened back then was, even before that time, back in the 1990s, there was a recession, and at least it was my understanding that the state was looking for some relief in the rates. And the actuaries offered a methodology to do their predictions that maybe, I don't want to say it wasn't conventional, but it was certainly would have provided relief, and it was a methodology that they said, we could be comfortable with you doing this for a short period of time to just sort of, ride out this recession type of thing. So that methodology, in terms of how to look at the liabilities, how to determine the liabilities, was adopted. It was intended to be only for a short period of time, but it was in place for about 15 years. And what it did was it really masked the true financial picture of what was going on with the retirement system. And so that was the one leg of this perfect storm. The other leg was that at the time when they had a lot of money coming into the system, the assumed rate of return was 9.5%, and they had a number of years where they were exceeding that. What they were doing, thinking that the system was well funded because the liabilities were sort of masked, wasn't a real clear picture, they were taking money out of the pension system and putting it into what was called a special account. So there was a separate pot of money for extra benefits, such as the medical subsidy, which is a subsidy towards health insurance, as well as cost of living adjustments. So it seemed like there was basically free money because it looked like the system was well funded, so why do we need all these investment earnings? We'll take some of them aside and use them for other benefits. Of course, one of the big things that happens there is when you're having those good years, when you're earning 12 or 15%, that's great, but there's going to be a year where you don't hit the mark or you're losing money, and that's why you have an average, but there was no cushion. So they were basically taking their cushion and spending it without saving that cushion for the bad years. So that was sort of the second piece of the perfect storm. And then the third piece was investment losses that did hit. So with all of those coming together, this sort of all really came to light around 2007. The legislature immediately changed the methodology so that there was a clearer picture of what this situation was, and they put into law a payoff period so that the unfunded liability would be paid off in 30 years. So we are into this 30-year amortization period. We're about 8 years into it, so I think we have 23 years left in paying off the liability. But as you can see, the liability has in fact increased, and certainly the recession that we had in 2008 and 2009 significantly contributed to growing that unfunded liability.
Yep. Can we just mention that lots of times you will hear people say that municipalities didn't pay what they were supposed to into the system. They didn't pay enough, and in part that's true, but neither did the state, and because we paid what was set forth in the law. So we always paid what the obligation was that we were legally charged with at that point. I think it sounds almost ridiculous now, but everybody, I think, has such a better understanding of the finances of how the system works. I don't think people really looked that closely at it before, and certainly there was a time back in the 2007, 2008 kind of period where there were municipalities who were saying, this isn't right. This is the rates are going up. There's not the proper kind of funding and oversight for this position, and that's part of what got this started. But should you hear people say that municipalities didn't pay enough, we paid the statutory rate, and I think everybody was operating a bit in the dark at that point.
Yeah, with some other public pension systems, you'll often hear the term, they had a contribution holiday. New Hampshire employers never took a holiday. We never had a holiday with our pension. Again, we paid what was required. It's just that what the system, the retirement system was saying was required was woefully inadequate because of the actuarial method that they had and because of the money being used in that special account. So we never took a contribution holiday in New Hampshire. Right now, from the standpoint of, how well funded is the system is at about 60% funding. Ideally, you want your system to be, you want to have your assets be 100% of your liabilities. That's the ideal. That is what is being worked towards with paying off through this amortization period. But again, you have to remember that not every person that has a benefit coming to them is going to retire tomorrow. If everybody was going to retire tomorrow and the system had to pay out $11 billion worth of benefits tomorrow, that would be a problem. But again, we're looking at this 25 to 30 year horizon. And so that's why, at least from the retirement system's perspective, there's a plan to pay this off. And yes, it's going to take time, but there is a plan to pay it off. Oops, here it is. So what I wanted to show you here was just sort of the breakdown of what we're talking about in terms of your rates. And these are a percentage of compensation. So for every $100 of compensation, this is what is being paid on what you as the employer is paying into the retirement system. So you can see the first two columns are for employees. It shows you what the rates were for fiscal year 16 and 17, and then the next column is fiscal year 18 and 19. Fiscal year 18 begins this July. So this is this July 1st, and then the next two columns are for the teachers. So there is what's called this normal cost. That's just basically the cost that is that's what's owed for the employees as they're earning their benefits today. The unfunded liability, that's the amount in red. So you can see, at least in the case of the teachers, what employers are paying towards that unfunded liability is more than what you're paying just for their normal pension cost. All right, the next line is the combination of those two. Then you see the amount that the members are paying. So they're paying 7% in, and that would leave the employers with the balance that shows you what you're paying in. Then there's also this medical subsidy that certain employees that qualify for it are receiving, so employers are paying for that. So then you see the total employee rate, and then what I've added was if the state was still paying the 35%, of course you can't quite see it on the screen here, but it would show you what that amount would be. In other words, if the state was still contributing 35%, you would only have to pay 65% of that total employer rate. Okay? And then the next one just shows the same thing for the police and fire. So again, working through that, you see those red numbers, all of them, the unfunded liability is exceeding what the normal pension cost is. So really, a lot of what you're paying is to pay off that unfunded liability. I think this is probably the better picture. Picture's worth 1,000 words. This is the picture's worth 1,000 numbers. This shows you what has happened to the employer rates over, I guess, the last 15 years or so. So you can see the different categories for teachers, employees, police, and fire, and what's happened with those rates. Let's just have a little, yes. So you can see right here, the big jump right here. This is the rates. These are the rates that resulted after the 2008-2009 recession. Because remember, they set the rates about a year and a half before they're going to be in effect so that you have time to budget for those increases. So that's why you see this huge jump here with police and fire and teachers. That was absorbing the recession, as well as when the state started eliminating the 35%. So you can see right here on the chart, they paid 35% until 2009, then they gradually dropped it down for a couple of years. 2012 was when it went down to zero. So that's why there's some big jumps there. More recently, right over here, with the rates that you're going to start paying this July, that was because the Board of Trustees lowered that assumed rate of return. They went from 7.75% down to the 7.25%. So again, in the long term, they're assuming less money will come in from investment earnings. So what floats? It's the employer rate, and that's pretty much the reflection right there of that increase. Couple of things that I did want to mention was that there have been discussions about making significant changes to the system. Back in 2007, there was what was called, there was a commission established. Again, that was following the time when they realized we really need to shine a light on this system and get things under control here. There was I think it was about a 20-member commission that had all stakeholders involved in it to take a comprehensive review of the retirement system and come out with recommendations as to basically how to right this ship. It took a couple of years for legislation to go through, but there were a lot of very significant recommendations in that report that did eventually get enacted into law, such as that independent investment committee, raising the age that some newly hired employees can retire, so it raised their age, raised the contributions. So in 2011, there were some significant reforms that were put in. NHMA and our members supported those reforms. And the reason we supported those reforms was because we understood that part of the intent of those reforms was to curb this increase, this ongoing increase in the employer rates. So we did very much support those reforms. And unfortunately, when the state removed that 35% contribution, it kind of it countered all the financial benefits of those reforms, at least to employers. Since then, there's been some discussion about should we change this from a defined benefit plan to a defined contribution plan, something more akin to a 401k plan. And the problem there is you still have that $5 billion of the unfunded liability. So it's not as if you can just flick a switch and say, okay, any new employees that start as of July 1st, we're going to put them in a defined contribution plan. You still have that huge unfunded liability that has to be paid off. And based on some of the studies that legislative committees have done on that, it actually in the long term looked like it was going to cost employers more if in fact they did try to just turn that switch off and put everyone in a defined contribution plan. Because of that, there wouldn't be the continuation in the defined benefit plan to kind of cover those long-term costs. There are some other options. Some other systems around the country have looked at sort of what they're calling hybrid plans, and I know we've had some legislative review of those plans. But I think the most important thing to recognize is that when that commission was established in 2007 that made all these recommendations that did take a few years to get implemented, what they also put in law was that that commission would be reconvened in 10 years to take another look at the system and take a comprehensive look and see what needs to be changed, what needs to be tweaked, what needs to be done. 2017 is that 10-year period. So this July 1st, that commission will convene again, report in December to the legislature on what recommendations they have going forward. And we do have a municipal representative that will serve on that commission. So in the past couple of years, any legislation that has come forward that is looking to tweak the system, our recommendation to the legislature has been let the commission look at it because they can look at it more comprehensively. And in the past, we've found that when legislation is enacted that tweaks it, there's always unintended consequences that catch people by surprise. So we'd rather have a comprehensive review than having surprises that particularly ones that come out to cost more money for employers. So I fear I'm going to have a very warm summer in the Legislative Office building as this commission is meeting all summer. And with that, I think I just wanted to mention a couple of bills. You've already heard about House Bill 413, which would restore the state contribution for teachers, police, and firefighters. It would be at 15%, not 35%, but right now that would be about $40 million. And we did include information about, estimating how much that would be for Claremont. And I apologize, I didn't look that number up specifically for Claremont, but we do have charts available on our website that show what that would be for your teachers, police and fire, and what that would mean for you. One of the other issues that we're dealing with, another bill that is a bit troubling, the direction that this one is heading, is House Bill 561, and this deals with the issue that some people call double dipping, but it's when employers rehire a retiree into a part-time position. And right now, that is perfectly legal to do. You can hire somebody who is a New Hampshire Retirement System retiree. They just can't work more than 32 hours per week, or there's a 1,300-hour limit per year in certain cases. The retirement system has indicated that the fact that employers are hiring back retirees has no financial impact, no fiscal impact on the system. It's not hurting the system. But there are certainly legislators who feel that this, from a public perception standpoint, that this is not a good thing, and they are looking to put in some I think, pretty harsh provisions to penalize employers for doing this. And we know, I'm not sure in Claremont how many part-time employees that you have, or part-time people that are retirees, but in many of our smaller towns, I mean, it's so almost like, they say, and America runs on Dunkin' Donuts. It's small towns run on part-time workers, and in some of those towns, getting somebody who is retired and has some experience may be the best choice for them. So we're a little troubled by this bill, but we'll be keeping a close tabs on it. And again, that decennial commission is starting this July 1st, and I think they will be taking up quite a number of issues. One piece of legislation this year was looking at that amortization period. It was the city of Nashua that put that forth to just say, hey, can you do anything with that 23 years of remaining amortization period to help lessen the burden on employers right now, because we're really hurting with where these rates are. That bill was amended, so it's now something for the decennial commission to look at. I think they'll be looking at things like the issue of the rehiring retirees. They'll be looking at the investment committee and whether they're doing the job as well as they should, if they should be more aggressive, be more conservative. So again, they'll be looking at the benefits that are going to employees. There is no COLA provision in our retirement system. Many other public pension systems have built-in cost of living adjustments for retirees. We don't, and that has certainly been something that is brought to the attention of the legislature quite frequently, that we're up to about 7, 8 years, 9 years where retirees have not had any adjustment. And unfortunately, I'm the one that has to go on those bills and oppose them if they're going to make employers pay for those cost of living adjustments. So there was a bill to look at that and have the state pay for that, but again, they're going to let the decennial commission look into that issue. So they're going to have a lot to address this summer. And with that, unless Judy has anything to add, no, I'd be happy to answer any questions. I know it was a lot to cover in a short period of time, but yeah.
Dr. McGoodwin, could you flip the lights again? Thank you.
Hi. And thank you for coming. That was very informative. I'm from Massachusetts, and I'm 22 days in up here, so understanding the New Hampshire, understanding the New Hampshire system is important. So this independent investment advisory group, I assume this is just, industry investors, hedge fund folks and whatnot. What is the management fees that they charge the New Hampshire retirement system?
This is an independent investment committee that they sort of oversee the investment managers. I don't know exactly. I mean, there are several investment managers for this fund. I don't know exactly what the fees are that they charge because I think what's being reported is net of their fees. But I can find out for you what those are. I'm sure the retirement system would be happy to let us know what that is.
Great.
Okay.
That's
Yep.
important.
Okay. No, the investment committee doesn't charge the fee. They're overseeing. They're not actively doing the investment.
Sure.
Okay, they're overseeing the investment
The
managers.
folks that are doing the
investments,
investing,
right? Yep.
knowing their fees is important. I mean, if we're paying anything, 2% or whatever is something
Yeah.
to be scrutinized.
Yeah.
Counselor Simons?
Yes, you had commented, and I just want to make sure I understand you correctly. There's no impact to the system when someone retires, and we bring that person back as a part-time employee.
That is what the executive director of the retirement system testified when specifically asked that question, what is the financial impact of rehiring retirees? I think what the issue seems to be more is concern that employers are taking full-time positions that would otherwise be paying into the system, being required to be, and turning them into part-time positions in order to save on paying benefits, not just the retirement, but your health insurance and other things.
And that's my question, is the impact, there's no impact if they change the position from full-time to part-time, or there's no impact by bringing those folks back part-time?
Well, it's interesting because I looked back at the, I think it was over a 5-year period, and over a 5-year period, we're not seeing the numbers, like the head count isn't dropping.
Right.
So even though there are some people that are saying employers are eliminating all these full-time positions and turning them into part-time positions, I'm not seeing that in the numbers in the head count, except with teachers. And the actuaries, when they just did the last valuation, said they built into the rates the fact that the number of teachers they are projecting that they're going to decrease because the student population across the state is declining. So they're equating the fact that there are going to be fewer students, there will be fewer teachers. So they have already built that into the rates, the fact that there will probably be fewer full-time teachers over the next 5 to 10 years. So other than the teachers, but that's already, again, it's being accounted for in the rates that you're paying right now for teachers. But the other numbers don't really play out that we're losing full-time employees.
My question was mainly on police departments, because I've seen at least 3 police departments where the police chief has retired, and the
Okay.
departments have turned the chief's position to a part-time position, which
But
eliminates the
eliminates
community
them,
from
but
turning that in.
then did they bring in another?
They bring in a retiree as
bring in
the
a
part-time,
retiree, right.
32-hour-a-week chief.
But do they also create perhaps another police position that somebody's at a lower salary, entry level?
That I'm unaware
Yeah.
of, yeah.
And I don't know, but again, the head counts are pretty much level, except for the teachers.
That question always comes up. I've always been asked that, and it's,
Yeah.
of course, it doesn't look good. It looks like we're, taking money away from the pension system.
Well, and I think at least my response to that to legislators that have asked that or approached me with that is that, when you look at all the money that used to come to municipalities for various funding, like the revenue sharing, like money for environmental grants for water and wastewater treatment, like the 35%. I mean, municipalities are probably getting about $80 million less a year from the state than they were back in 2009 before the recession. So how are you? What do you want to do? You're just going to increase property taxes to cover that, or are you going to be more creative in how you're providing the services at the most, cost beneficial way you can?
I jump up for.
Okay.
I get exercised about that.
Oh, okay. She gets exercise about that. Yeah.
Well, I want to follow off of Counselor Simons. I mean, you're saying from 2006 you had 51,738 folks contributing, and then in 2016 you had 48,069 folks contributing, but you're not seeing the trend of municipalities using more part-time workers. I mean, is this all just folks, retiring out of the system? That's the drop-off in people paying in versus
Yeah, I think
off-takers?
again, it's probably a lot of it is the trickle as a result of the recession, because I know a lot of municipalities we're having to weather the recession by
Right,
attrition
just-
or
right.
so
Just leaving positions unfilled.
leaving positions unfilled. But now I think we're starting to see them trickle back up a little bit. But I'm not seeing the drastic trend of saying, when you look at the police or firefighter numbers, they've been pretty much consistent
Right.
for the last 5 years. So we're not seeing that we're not seeing elimination of a lot of full-time positions.
Great, thank you.
Anybody on the council that has another question? Mr. Folta, you had one question?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Bernie Folta, Ward 3. I actually have 3 questions. You used a very interesting phrase toward the beginning. Quote, share of unfunded liability, unquote. That led me to believe that Claremont is somehow on the hook, as is every other municipality, on the hook for its share or some share of unfunded liability. I see you're nodding your head as a yes.
Yes.
Okay, so how is that accounted for on the city's books? Does it affect the tax rate? That's the first question. You want to go with that?
Yeah,
I
I
have
think
2
one
more.
question at a time would be good
Okay.
for me, because I'll forget your first question by the time you get to the third one. So that's correct. That unfunded liability is being shared by all those 471 employers on your books. And that is a recent change under the accounting standards, what's called the Government Accounting Standards Board, GASB. I don't want to get too in the weeds with that. But for financial reporting purposes, now, you do pick up that liability on your financial statements, your audited financial statements for the city of Claremont, for your school district. However, that liability is not picked up in your tax rates. So you are not paying that through your tax rates, other than the fact that you're paying on the compensation for your members. So it's being picked up there. That's how you're paying
So
for it.
it's like a debt that's hanging there.
Yes, it is. That is a debt that's
But-
hanging. Yeah.
But that debt fluctuates because of actuarial models. I mean, from year to year, in Massachusetts, we call this OPEB, other post-employment benefits, and that's the liability each community has towards the retirement. But one year it could be 4 million, the next year it could be 3.5 million, or 3.7 million, or 4.2 million, based upon different, actuarial things.
And with New Hampshire, this system, this is called a multiple employer cost sharing plan. So everybody's in it, all these 471 employers, you're all in it together, you all have the same rates. So there is really no such thing as what is Claremont's true liability, unfunded liability, because you're all on the plan together. And for example, you could have somebody that comes here and works for 1 year and then retires because they worked 20 years for the state. So where would that liability be? They'd have 20 years worth of liability with the state, 1 year with you. It's not tracked like that. You're all in this together.
So is it just for Claremont a percentage, the same as everybody else?
It's a percentage, and it's the retirement system does the reporting so that you can pick it up in your audited financial statements, and I believe they base it on your percentage of the contributions. How much did you pay in last year versus what everybody paid in? So that it just picks it up. So yes, if all of a sudden you have a higher payroll because you're being very generous with your increases, merit increases, for example, you're going to pick up a little bit higher percentage of that unfunded liability. So it's based on what you've actually paid in the previous year.
So if I want to find out what the current hanging debt for this unfunded liability is I go to the audit report.
Right.
It should be in the audited financial statements, yes.
And that'll be presented in
And
March.
you're going to have you're going to look for it on what's called the government-wide. Your government-wide financial statements, those are your accrual-based financial statements versus the ones that are used to set your tax rate, the property tax rate. Okay?
Next question. I seem to remember that a year or two ago, the New Hampshire Union Leader published the retirement benefits that all of Manchester's retirees were getting. And they presumably got this from a right-to-know request, which suggests that anybody who wants to know what a retiree is getting, all they need to do is a 91A, we call it a 91A hereabouts, and they can get that information. Is that correct?
As far as I know, that is correct, and I believe a couple of years ago, the retirement system was getting those requests, and I think they actually put a searchable document out. So you could search by, you could kind of search it from high to low, you could search it by somebody's name, so, and I believe, do you recall if there was a lawsuit on that? I think there was a question at one point how much information they could provide without violating privacy laws kind of thing. So it might have been challenged at one point, but yeah, that is public information, as far as I know.
So now Assistant Mayor Bergeron, who's not here tonight, is a retired firefighter, and if I wanted to know what he was getting, all I have to do is a little request, right-to-know request to you.
It wouldn't come to us.
Oh.
It wouldn't come to the municipal association. We don't have
Oh,
that
you're the
information. Yeah,
municipal
association.
Right,
It
I
would
go
be
to the
the New
retirement.
Hampshire retirement
Yes,
system.
Okay. Now, by way of disclosure, having gotten started with Who's Who, Councilor Pope is a public employee, so I'm presuming he's a member of the retirement system. I mean, I'm just going by basis of,
Mr. Folta, need to wrap it up. We have other
okay.
items.
And Mr. Temple, Mr. Dameron, and Mr. Simons. So it looks like a majority of this council
Mr. Folta,
are connected to, I'm just doing like disclosure,
but this is
so there's
time
nothing
for,
hidden.
this
Thank
is
you.
time for question and answer. We have to move on.
Was I
So-
correct? Question?
You just call me up, Bernie, I'll tell you. I have nothing to hide. Just call me up, you don't have to do a 91A, you'll be all set. Folder closer.
I don't want to single you out. I was trying to make a point.
I know.
Okay, Mrs. Reed, I have one, unless anybody else has a question, I just have one final question before we move on to the rest of the agenda, and that is, where is 413 now? I know it's going to the Finance Committee, but have they set a date for that, or?
It is going to what's called Division 1
Yeah,
in House Finance, and Division 1 is having a work session next Tuesday. So we will be
Tuesday.
setting notices out to our members to contact the members of Division 1, because the vote that was taken obviously was the policy vote, so it was a very strong policy position. Now the finance folks have to find the money, and it's part of the whole budget.
okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'd like to thank you on behalf of the entire council for your time and coming up here. I know it's a long drive, and you've already worked a full day, so thank you for being here.
We love talking about this and making sure that people understand what it's all about. Because for a long time, we didn't understand, and that's part of what got us into the trouble that we're in. And I just want to say as to 413, we have a long ways to go.
Oh, yes.
And we hear from various legislators that this is never going to be funded. And it might in the end never be funded, but we're going to work really hard to make them have to sweat it out before they turn it down. So.
Well, thank you for all of your efforts on that. Oh, yes.
Could you tell me why the state quit doing the 35% in the first place?
The state withdrew the 35% to save money.
And it
For
was
them, for them.
It was the perfect time to do it because the changes that they had made in the structure were going to allow municipal rates to go down. So instead of municipal rates going down, they basically stayed even. And the state eliminated its 35%, and then the rates shot up. So we did all of that work.
With the
Those of us
reforms.
at the Municipal Association, our members, we did all of that work and never got the benefit of
The reforms.
the reforms because the state changed the rules by eliminating the 35%.
Right, good enough. I just thought that was an important thing for people to know.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you
you.
very much
Thank
for
you.
wanting to hear this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So-